chapter 1 and bring your attention to a topic that I said, from anguish to amazement, from sadness to joy, from defeat to victory, from despair to hope in God. Several weeks ago, when the school finished, my son graduated from TCIS. Several of our friends who were working in TCIS, whom we knew very well, were also leaving Korea. Some of them had already confirmed their next place of employment, but one particular family that we were very close to had no idea where they would be going. They'd been praying, and we had prayed for them, and every time we meet them, they would come around and hug and ask all kind of funny questions. And how long is this God sleeping? When is he going to wake up and answer our prayers? Our date to fly has come, and we don't have any idea what we are going to do next. Having 4 beautiful children and no job for both of the parents, it was a scary thing. And about a week ago, after they went to the US anyway, since they had no position in Korea, they sent a message and said, God is a good God. After all, He did answer us in an amazing way, and the job that we have landed is the perfect one for us. Even though He was late, nevertheless, He was thinking about us. That's what she sent a message. Even though He was late, but yet He was still thinking about us. It is we who couldn't understand. They were going through a period of anguish, having 4 children, supposed to go to school, and no place of employment, and living in a country. They had planned to stay in Korea for several years, and suddenly they had to change. So you could see life can turn upside down at any moment. Our life can go through a period of anguish or sorrow or grief at any given moment in time. And if we don't know God, that is much more scary. But even those of us who know God, it can still be very difficult. It is a very challenging place to be in an anguishing position, a confusing place. As I was reading her message, my thought went to Hannah, not Hannah here, but the Hannah in the Bible, Samuel's mom, and that's where I just wanted to share with you that we can expect these kind of things in life, but at the same time, we do not have to live in defeat or in fear or in a kind of uncertainty, because there is a God that you and I worship, and He is indeed a living God. He does answer our prayer. Maybe He is a bit slow in hearing our prayers. Maybe He is a little bit forgetful in our thinking, but eventually He is a God who watches over us, who has absolute interest in your and my well-being. He is a God who would do anything to come and assist you to live a life that is worthy of life. So anguish and grief and hopelessness is not our final destination. Even though we may encounter those kind of monuments in our life, as a journey, as a traveler, you will come across those valleys and mountains in life, but that is not our destination. Let us see from this family in 1 Samuel chapter 1. I'm going to read first 1 and 2 and then jump in verse 9. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zephite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, and son of Jehoram, son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephraimite. That means this man was a reputed man. To give this long introduction, he has several degrees. So this was a man. And verse 2, he had 2 wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Then jump in verse 9. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my Lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. She was praying out of great bitterness, anguish, and sorrow. And as she finished her prayer, her face was no longer downcast. She had a different countenance. Her face became brighter. The sorrow-filled face got transformed in a joy-filled face, even though the circumstance had not changed. Nothing had changed. But Hannah's face changed. That talks a lot about what has happened in the spiritual world here. So let me quickly run through this story for you to come some kind of application for our personal life. First of all, there appears to be a normal family, but the life in this family was far from normality. From the outside look, it looks in a very normal family, but it is far from normality. In this family, there is tremendous stress, a tension going on. And first, we see the man having 2 wives. Now, it is culturally acceptable in those days, and even in some of the Asian cultures, it is okay, and especially in the Islamic religions, you have been mandated or given the permission by the divine power to have 4 wives. But if you know someone who has 2 wives, you would immediately come to a conclusion that if there is a God who told you to have more than 1 wife, then he must be out of his mind. Anybody who has observed in a culture where it is okay to have 2 wives, I'm not talking about in Korea or America where it's not okay, and yet your husband has a secret wife and definitely it's going to destroy your life. But even if it is okay, even if it is acceptable within your culture to have multiple wives, you watch that family and you realize there is something fundamentally wrong here. That family will never be at peace among themselves. Never. It is not the will of God to have more than 1 wife and 1 woman combination as a family. It is God's divine order to be married with one person for the rest of your life so long as you leave. But look at in verse 8, the consequences of having two wives. Read verse 8 with me. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Now, with all possibility, Hannah must be the first wife. And because of the barrenness, he must have taken the second wife to continue his descendant. So, yet he loves Hannah so much. And later, if you read little verses above, he always used to give Hannah more than what he gave to the rest of the sons and daughters and his next wife. He wanted to demonstrate how much he loved Hannah, but that never fulfilled Hannah's longing. He said, Hannah, am I not better than 10 sons? Why are you so much concentrating on your barrenness? I love you. And the sad thing is, by loving Hannah, he is also depriving the next woman as well. So there is this impossibility of living together in a loving relationship once there are more than two human beings in marriage. The famous story of the last century of this kind of grief-filled family was Prince Charles and his wife Diana. That all of you who were born in the 60s and the 70s, you must be quite familiar with her story. And one time she was telling, the reason there is so much meaninglessness or grief in my life is because my marriage is crowded. So I can never forget that Diana's word, that my marriage is crowded. So here we see this family from outside, culturally, religiously, in a society, even from the onlookers, it looks a perfect, normal family, but it is far from normality. There is this kind of a tension. Secondly, having to compete for the love of the husband is not the best place to be in. There is a competition to receive the love of the husband. Hannah, maybe she knew that her husband loves, but the next wife would also be very jealous. There is this competition to receive love from the husband. It is a universal fact that any woman would do anything to get love from her husband. Or any man would do anything for his life if his wife truly respects him the way he is. So the biblical command to love your wife and to respect your husband is a universal divine order God has given to humanity, whatever religion you have. That if your wife cannot respect you, it's a great disgrace. It's a great damaging effect in your emotions, in your intellect, in your personality. You may try to reject it, you may try to deny it, you may try to do all kind of other activities to compensate the loss of honor in your home. But if wife does not honor the husband, doesn't respect the husband, not in a sense of the master, but a genuine, loving, respectful honor to your man. And if you can honor your man, respect your man, and then if your man loves you with his life, is willing to give his life. Husband is supposed to give his life for his wife. That's what Ephesians said. You ought to love your wife just as Christ has loved his church. He gave himself for the church, and the husbands ought to give his life for his wife. And if wife can come to that understanding of the love of the husband, that my husband loves me with his life, she will definitely respect you. So it is a kind of a dynamic functioning of the love and respect together. If there is no respect, there may be no possibility of love. If there is no love, then there may be no possibility of respect either way. So these two things have to come together in a loving relationship. But if a wife has to compete for the love from the husband, it is a very sad place to be in. Not necessarily you may be married to another woman, not necessarily you may have a secret girlfriend, but maybe if you are too given up for the job, you're working day and night and you don't have any time for your wife. You have no concern that today is a weekend, or you have no feeling for her that she is a human being who needs to be taken care. She is a human being who needs to express your love to her in a tangible way. Not just to be taken for granted all the time, but a deliberate attempt to demonstrate your love. That would be amazing. But oftentimes I have seen, especially, I'm sorry for the Korean friend here, I don't know the culture, maybe I am wrong, but I do feel, not every one of you, but most of you have no time for your wives. You have time for friends, and if you want to go for dinner, party, every Friday company calls you for a party, you must go there. Every other day, someone calls you, you must go there. But for wife, she has to take care of the children. So, I just want to leave you. Outside may look okay, but there may be hunger within your wife's heart. I wasn't married for a long time, and one day, in one night, I saw my wife, I felt something was wrong with my wife on bed while we were sleeping, and she was sobbing. And I touched her, there were tears in her eyes. I turned on the light and we sat up and I said, "What's wrong?" I wasn't a family man when I grew up. I grew up in a very broken family, and in fact I didn't have any family. I grew up in the street, if you say, literally. And after marriage, I had many friends, of course. And I used to go here and go there. I brought my wife from India, kept her in Nepal, where she knew no language and she knew nobody there. She was all by herself, whole day. And we didn't have any children at that time. She was all by herself, and I thought that she's reading books, or she's doing this, and she's doing that. I thought she was happy. I never thought that I was such a horrible man that his wife would cry at night. But there was I. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "You don't care for me." And since that day, I took a deliberate attempt to take care of my wife and to stay away from my friend. I used to play chess a lot, and sometimes I was addicted to it. That's not because I was so busy. I would call someone, even at home. She is at home, I'm at home, but then I'll call someone and we'll play chess for 3 hours on a straight. When I came to Christ, I had a great trouble to pray. Every time I prayed, the chess would come to my mind. That much addicted I was. It is literally true, I'm talking to you. I had a hard time to get out of this demonic spirit of chess out of my mind. And there, newly married man, spending all the time with my friend, and wife is left alone. Looks okay outside, but not okay inside. So if you wives are competing for the love from your husband, I sympathize with you. And the men, you ought to give your wife before she even asks for love. You need to go extra mile to demonstrate your love. But here we see Hannah competing for the genuine love from a genuine man. We see her rival also doing the same thing. And that is what not normal with this family. 2 wives is not normality. It's an abnormal condition. Now, competing for love from your husband, it is not normal. And then, having a rival to nag you all the time is not a good feeling to have. There is a rival nagging you all the time because the husband is loving you more, and therefore she is determined to make your life as much as miserable as possible. So it's constantly she is looking for excuses to put Hannah down, to irritate her. That's the word. Let me read for you. What did she do? Verse 10. Particularly when it comes to relationship with God. Look at verse 10. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And then go verse 15. Not so, my Lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. And then go to verse 3 onward. Year after year, this man went up from his hometown to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. And because of the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Can you imagine the pain and the suffering that Hannah is going through in her emotions? Not one time, year after year. And much more so when she goes to the temple of God. Someone is constantly nagging at you. Someone is constantly eating you alive from inside. Maybe you don't have a rival. Maybe you don't have 2 wives. But maybe there is some individual in your life who is constantly nagging at you. Maybe there is a problem in your life that has constantly nagged at you. Maybe you have a difficulty with raising children. Maybe you have a problem in your working environment. Somewhere, something is constantly nagging you, particularly when you come to church. Or when you want to do something for God, when you want to worship God, when you want to give your life for God, these things will pop up their head. So Hannah's emotions are damaged. She is filled with grief. She is filled with anguish. She is filled with hopelessness. Because there was a person who was constantly nagging at her, irritating her, provoking her, making her get angry, making her to say things that are not kind. So when someone provokes you and you make the mistake of responding to them, then it leaves you a greater crater in your heart. The other day we were talking about how Paul says we need to consider one another or consider others better than ourselves. And in that topic we say, when someone responds to you in a negative way, maybe there is a response to the negative that is within you already, or maybe not always. So when someone provokes you and you are tempted to respond to that negative provocation, and that will multiply your grief, that will multiply your anguish and bitterness. So the first thing I said, this family is not normal, appears to be normal. Maybe you look okay from outside. Maybe your family is okay from outside, but maybe there are things that ought to be settled. There are things you have to take it very seriously or honestly. The second thing is not just normal family. In spite of this abnormality in that family, they had one thing that is good, and that is they continue to worship God. in spite of their weaknesses, in spite of the wickedness that is there in the family, in spite of the provoking and hating or insulting, they have one thing in common, and that is the family still worships God. They have not lost all hope, because the man Elkanah seems to be a godly man, and who year after year goes to Shiloh. Now you have to understand, Shiloh was the center of worship in those days, and there was a priest called Eli, and he had two wicked sons who were also priests. And they were practicing all kind of immorality in the church. They were doing all kind of embezzlement of the people's offering. When you brought some offering to the temple, they just grabbed it away and took it away. And there were prostitution going on there. They were raping women who came to offer sacrifices. So therefore, when Eli the priest saw Hannah in a drunken state of her grief, he thought that she is one of those women. And that's what she said, "My Lord, don't think I'm a wicked woman." So Shiloh wasn't an ideal place to go and worship God. Elkanah could have said, "I hate them. I hate the priest. I hate the system. I don't want to go there." But Elkanah and the family, their faith in God transcended the wickedness in the temple. The God they worshipped was beyond Eli's family or the wickedness of his sons. So year after year, he takes the offering and he goes to the temple and they worship God. So if you have abnormality in your family, in your personal life, you and I should never stop worshiping God. Never. Never give up coming to church. Yes, maybe people have terrible things going on in the church. Never give up God in any way or any form that you can. Do whatever it takes to hang on, because if you give up worshiping God, then the abnormal situation will go out of control and it will destroy you. So Elkanah's family looks normal outside, but inside it is abnormal. Yet in their abnormality, they worship God. They have constantly gone to Shiloh to sacrifice year after year. Look at in verse 19. Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. After doing all those things, they stayed one night and offered sacrifices and all those things, and they worshipped before the Lord as a family. I can testify with you that I have only one son and only one wife, and yet we do have arguments at home. And yet we do get upset at times. But we have never stopped praying. Because if I got upset with my son or with my wife, if they got upset with me, that's one thing. But we never stopped praying together. I remember one day my son coming from the school, and I was listening to a sermon. You've been listening this many sermons, and how long it will take for you to get changed? You are not yet changed. You've been listening this many sermons all the time, and you are not changed. Why do you waste your time? That really put me in a thinking mode. Yeah, I need to be changed. Your son can tell you exactly who you are. Your children can tell you. They are the best judge of your true life at home. So it's bitter, but it is true. So if you can gain your children's respect, you are a great person. You have succeeded at home. So, yet, even if you have terrible thing going on at home, don't you ever stop praying together. Don't you ever stop worshiping God together. Because when you come together, that's when you get to confess your sin. That's when you get to ask forgiveness from one another. That's when you forgive each other and you build your family and you go on. That's when you teach your children that Christianity is not much of a religion, but a relationship that we need to maintain with one another and with God in the same way. So Elkanah's family had one thing going on for them, and that is they worshipped God in spite of their weaknesses in their life. But Hannah took her faith to the next level. Hannah took her faith beyond temple, beyond church, and beyond the family worship. She was desperate in her situation. She was a godly woman, no doubt about it. She was being provoked by her rival all the time. And it appears the way she puts herself through in the temple that she never responded to her rival in a negative way. She kept within her heart all the pains and the bitterness, and then she, the word is, let me give you the word in verse 9. What did she do in verse 9? She took her faith to the next level. How do we know? Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, after they went to the temple, Hannah stood up. That's just the word, but the writer has put it in a way. Hannah stood up and she went to pray to God. She took her faith beyond the family altar. She took her faith beyond the institutional religious system of way of worshiping. And she goes and she begins to pray. And then in verse 10 you see, she is praying out of a bitter heart. She is pouring out her bitterness to God. She's not pouring out her bitterness to Elkanah or to her rival or to the priest in the temple. She is pouring out her bitterness to God. She's praying out of her anguish and grief in verse 10. She began to say, God, what is it? How long will you not hear my cry? Because in those days to be barren is to be cursed by God. In the passage we see, God had closed her womb. The Lord himself closed Hannah's womb. So there was not much she could do. And yet, instead of getting bitter and angry with God, she goes to God and says, God, I'm going to pour out my bitterness. I'm going to pour out my anguish. But one thing I'm going to ask you, wouldn't you give me a son? If you give me the son, that I promise I'll give you the glory. I'll give you the honor. For you, I will dedicate that boy. Yes, it is good to come to church. It is good to pray together in your family. But if you want to come out of your grief, if you want to come out of your anguish, if you want to come out of your abnormal situations in life, you need to take your faith beyond that. Just like Hannah, she took to God personally. In those days, as a woman, it is not normal to go, a woman, to the temple and pray like a priest. But she did it. She took God personally and very seriously. So family worship is not a substitute or not sufficient for your personal worship of God. And if your family, if your personal life is not going the way you want it to go, you just don't have time left. You need to stand up like Hannah. It's been year after year. It's been going on like that for a long period of time. Years are being wasted away. But that day, she decided to stand up and go to God and knock on his door as if this is the last chance. So you want to see change in your life, you need to check how many years you have wasted And you need to stand up out of that place, shake up and go to God like never before and ask God to come and intervene. Be desperate. Jesus said, they that are hungry and thirsty for righteousness will be satisfied. So any prayer that you are praying, anything that you are seeking from God, any problem that you are looking to be solved in your life, it will not go easily away. It will need your faith, and that faith will need to be beyond the church, beyond your family prayer, beyond some religious activity. It has to go you and to God, between you and God, personal level. And then you will see the change coming your way. When Hannah went to the temple, prayed with the mighty heart that she had, and poured out all her anger and bitterness, and promised to God that if you answer, I'm going to honor you. And verse 18, she stood up again, went and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Her face was no longer sad. It is very disturbing to know that your face can communicate, right? We have certain facial expressions that have sometimes we cannot hide. And Hannah couldn't hide this amazing, exuberant face of joy when she came out of the temple. So when you pray for something, don't stop halfway. Pray until you have that sure inner conviction of the joy of God filling your heart. Don't give up easily. The problem with Christians, we give up so easily. We become so tired. Don't give up easily. Like Hannah, go to God in a desperation, and God will lead you to a situation where you will be amazed. Hannah was amazed, and she brought forth a son by the name of Samuel. She gave him the name Samuel, and that means I ask him from the Lord. And the thing is that after God answered Hannah's prayer, for several years, Hannah did not go to the temple. Why? Not because she hates the temple, but because she wanted to raise up this child in such a way that when she goes to God, she goes to the temple, she's going to honor him with the best she has. She worships God in a personal way. She began to seek God on her own way, not necessarily going to the temple. Her faith had transcended the religious system. Her faith had become so personal. Yahweh had become so personal to Hannah that she was able to raise up this little baby in such a way that he could be left in the temple, and in an early age he was able to hear the voice of God. And he became one of the most important figures in the history of Israel. He was the nation was going through some of the most difficult period in time. The judges were wicked and dark period was there. But Samuel stood as the best judge, and then he was the best priest, and he was the best prophet. And who took the nation in a transitional period from the lawlessness, from the dark period into the kingdom age, anointing Saul and then later David. So this was a great prophet. And look at Hannah's prayer, and then I close. Let me read Hannah's prayer and I close. Her amazement when God answers, the amazement comes in this way. In chapter 2, verse 1 to 11, I'm going to read. That is how she was amazed. From anguish-filled prayer, look at the next prayer. Then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak so arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are ways. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumble are armed with strength. Those who were full tire themselves out for food, but those who were hungry hunger no more. She who was barren has bore 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. The foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder against them from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. Let us close our eyes for a moment and consider these family situations here.